Welcome to BYJU'S IAS and welcome to our weekly specially curated program of international affairs. Call it a survey, call it a review, in which our effort is to add value to whatever you have been reading about international events, issues, individuals, and to enrich your understanding of global politics, India's national interest, formulation and implementation of India's foreign policy. We are Indians and our view is always Indo-centric, but it is necessary to have an open mind and not have a parochial mind, but be open to ideas and developments which are occurring all over the globe. Sometimes we try to provide historical background, sometimes we try to look forward into the future. Most of the time we are firmly planted in the present. And this time what we intend to do with you is a very interesting discussion. We seem to focus on crisis points, we seem to focus on flashpoints, we seem to be focused on developing events. We often tend to overlook large chunks of territory which remain neglected till they become flashpoints or till they become crisis points. We are going to discuss a much neglected topic with you this time, that of Eastern Europe. In recent past, whenever we have discussed Europe, we have talked of Brexit, we have talked of the dissensions within the European Union, we have talked of the larger powers, the erstwhile great powers like France and Germany. We have talked about fissures within the European Union, the Portugal, Spain, Italy and Greece, which were called the pigs. We have talked about the refugee crisis, its impact on Europe. We have talked in terms of Europe's problems with America, especially in the context of its retreat after Afghanistan, or Brexit, Britain going out. We have also discussed the impact of China and Russia on the major powers in Europe, but we tend to overlook a large chunk of Europe, which goes by the name of Eastern and Central Europe. And these countries are numerous. They are 25, 26 plus. Some people add Russia into Eastern Europe, but we'll keep Russia apart for the moment. Russia is a Eurasian country. Large chunk of its territory is in Asia, in Central Asia, in East Asia. And of course, it has a very, very predominant European interface also. We'll discuss countries in Eastern and Central Europe other than Russia in this episode. The reason for that is simple, because Russia is a major power, a superpower, a power that claims parity with USA. And of course, the other countries have often been treated, especially during the Cold War, as satellites or parts of the Russian Soviet Empire. We'll talk about this briefly to have a clear understanding. We shall, of course, exclude from even this discussion, which we have been discussing, countries like Ukraine, which have had a especially fraught relationship with Russia in recent past, which has led to Russian annexation of Crimea, which continues to simmer as a tension point all along. We will not talk of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, which are either constituent units of the Russian state at the moment, but we'll talk in terms of countries which are torn between two magnetic poles. The pole of Europe, the Western Europe, the NATO alliance, closer relationship with the United States of America, and of course, at the same time, not being quite able to shake themselves free from historical ties in the 20th century, in the communist period of when the Russian power was in zenith in the USSR, and then think in terms of what is happening there at the moment. Why we are discussing this is because two bits of crisis have been added to the boiling cauldron of European Union at the moment. Poland, the Polish Supreme Court has just passed a law saying that parts of the European Union laws are against the constitution of Poland. Now, this is well known that when Poland joined, like Hungary joined, like other countries joined, they willingly accepted that it would be some kind of a voluntary relinquishing of their sovereignty and giving a commitment to abide by the European Union laws, European Union courts, and share certain values which are the core values of European Union. Now, Poland has come out with this, and Hungary has also come out with a legislation which is against the LGBTQ community, the lesbians, the gays, the bisexuals, the transgenders and queers of all kinds, which is called the Rainbow Coalition. We'll discuss this later. And the President of the European Union, Ms. von der Leyen, has categorically said this is a shameful act on part of Hungary, and they can't continue like this if they behave like this. Poland stands by its Supreme Court's judgment and say they will not compromise their sovereignty. So people are already talking in whispers, at least, loud whispers, of maybe Polexit being there, maybe Hungarexit being there, and how it will impact on the European Union. There are other problems with other countries, amongst themselves, with the European Union. We shall discuss them one by one. Before we discuss in detail specific cases like Poland or Hungary or Czechoslovak Republic or Slovenia or Serbia or Montenegro, whatever we do, we have to discuss the general background, why there is a resentment in Eastern Europe against their West European cousins. I think throughout the history, the big powers, France and Germany after its unification, which swallowed up the Habsburg monarchy of Austria-Hungary, and this was the time when the greatest contact of Central Europe with Southern Western Europe was made. When Hungary was part of Austria, Austria after the unification was part of Germany, and so Prussia and Austrian-Hungary Empire united to have Germany, and this continued till First World War and after. Now, what happens is that these countries feel that they have the countries, the small kingdoms, principalities in Eastern and Central Europe, that they have been treated like children of lesser God by the richer, supposedly who claim to be more cultured than these states of the Western Europe. They never have been a part of the core of Europe. Now, they are Christian, but they all do not always follow the same sects of Christianity as our dominant Roman Catholic Church in France or Roman Catholic Church with slight moderation and Protestant in Germany. Although all the countries in Europe, bar a few, are predominantly Christian countries, but they do not always adhere or profess to the same doctrine of Christianity or sects. In France, there is Orthodox Roman Catholic Church. In Italy, there is Roman Catholic Church. In Germany, there is Roman Catholics and some Protestants also. But when we come to the Eastern European countries, Poland, of course, is strongly Roman Catholic, formal. But then when you go eastwards, you go more to the central core, you have an influence of Greek Orthodox Church, Syrian Christian Church, and various other sects which are local. And there are populations which have ethnicities which are all white-skinned people, all Christian people, but of course very different from the Gallic French people, from the Teutonic German people, and they are also very different from their Slav cousins in Russia. So there are Hungarians and Polish and Czechs, the Albanians, Romanians, Bulgarians, Latvians, Estonians, Lithuanians, all have had a very strong sense of ethnic national identity. They have been parts of, at times, Polish Empire, at times of Hungarian, larger neighbor's empire, partly Russian Empire. Their memories go back in past, where before the Empire of Russia, the Tsarist regime had been established, there had been a small duchy of Khiva, which had at times had to cope with stronger Polish neighbors. So there is a very interesting, but we are not going back centuries in past. We are talking in terms of mostly the memories of the 20th century. The memories of the 20th century are again fraught with very bitter memories of persecution of Jews, persecution of ethnic minorities. But one thing which specialists have agreed upon is that all countries in Eastern and Central Europe show a strong xenophobic trend. They want to keep their populations within their borders homogeneous. They don't look at foreigners very favorably, and they want to take pride in their cultural and nationalistic heritage, their national heroes, their struggles against maybe the Poles or Hungarians or Russians or against each other. Even Lithuanians, Estonians and Latvians have similar memories. Now, the essential thing to remember is this: not only they want to keep populations within their borders homogeneous, they are not particularly keen to have their diaspora elsewhere, because in the immediate neighborhood where there are disputed borders, where there are disputed natural resources, presence of a diaspora in a neighboring country can be the fifth column, so to speak. There are some disputes, some conflict going on here. There also is, at some cases, there is a presence of a large enough Muslim population which may not be majority in every country, but which are looked upon with suspicion. So it is not only accidental that many members of NATO, which have been kept in suspense about their membership in European Union, are the ones which are with a predominantly Muslim population or a majority Muslim minority in their own countries. You can take Turkey, you can take Albania, you can take Kosovo, you can take Romania, you can take to a certain extent Bulgaria. So you have this problem about religion and ethnicity. Now, why were these countries looked down as children of a lesser god or stepchildren? The reason is that basically they were poor countries. None of these countries had succeeded in establishing a major empire in Asia, Africa, or Latin America. They had not exploited the resources of these continents. They had not enriched themselves at the expense of others. They could not claim that their citizens had promoted or patronized by other major imperial powers, gone and discovered new worlds like the Spanish or the Portuguese or the English, who had circumnavigated the globe, who had discovered the new world, who had claimed to have discovered India. So all these things kept them apart. One would even argue that the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution had bypassed them. They lived in Middle Ages, that they were not quite enlightened people. And the richer, more arrogant, quote unquote, in their mind to the mind of the East Europeans, neighbors like French and the German felt that these were people who were gypsies, Romans, nomadic people who lived in Middle Ages, who had superstition, and they believed in werewolves, they believed in Draculas. So they were remote, they were poor. It is a very unfair comment on these. This is the arrogance of the people who were not necessarily superior people in themselves. They had beaten the others to the race of development, exploiting other people's resources, the African resources, Latin American resources, the Asian resources. So there was this element of exploitation which fueled the Industrial Revolution. And when you write the history with hindsight, you can say all these things were following a plan which enlightened leadership in the West European countries was following. But you see, for the 250 years since French Revolution and Napoleonic Empire, the West European countries, France and Germany, have dominated the European theatre, and the East European countries have only been objects with which they have played around. Now, if we keep this in mind, and then we see, since the Second World War, most of these countries had no choice, but when the Russian army was occupying half of Europe, there was this Iron Curtain drawn across the Europe. It was not only the partition of Germany or partition of Berlin, it was these countries which had no option but to be close to Russia. Now, once this happened, they were ideologically different. They followed a model of economic development which was different, and it was very difficult to dovetail it and accept it back. Germany could reunite because memories of pre-partition Germany were very, very strong. Memories of Germany as being a great imperial power, even before the rise of Nazis. They had the guilt. They had to pay the price for the sins of their fathers, so to speak, of the Nazi parentage. But once they regained their economic developmental pace, thanks to the Marshall Plan, thanks to the American defense umbrella of NATO, they could think in terms of regaining their place in Europe. France had the same thing. France, under de Gaulle, when he came to power, talked all the time of French glory. So they could think in terms of a glorious colonial past, glorious imperial past, glorious cultural contribution to the rest of Europe. People very easily forgot the cultural contribution of these small countries, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Poland. All these countries have produced great mathematicians, great artists, great musicians, great builders, and they have contributed to the heritage of mankind, humankind, very, very generously. But this was almost forgotten as soon as they became part of the Soviet Empire, now the Russian influence, the orbit, the satellites. Now, during the Cold War, there were rebellions against the oppression of the Stalinist regime or even post-Stalinist regime, where countries like Hungary and Poland wanted to follow their own course. And their rebellions were very brutally crushed in 56 Hungary and Poland, both Gomulka and Imre Kazi, both were suppressed. As late as 1968, the spring in Praha of Dubček was crushed again with Russian tanks, and Brezhnev enunciated a doctrine of limited sovereignty of socialist countries. Their primary loyalty was to protect and coordinate their policies with the Soviet Union then. And strange and ironically, the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan was also explained in terms of limited sovereignty of the then communist government in power in Afghanistan. Now, interestingly, it did not end there. What happened was there were resentments against this, that there was a Yugoslav intellectual, Mihailo Djilas, who talked of the new class, who talked of nomenclature. People were criticizing the Soviet system, the stranglehold on them. But there was not much they could do. After the decline of the Khrushchev's regime, and after Brezhnev was not in power, and after Mikhail Gorbachev was trying to talk in terms of perestroika and glasnost, there was a kind of ripples which turned into waves of independence from Russia and communist ideology in all these countries. So you have a very interesting situation in Poland, where you have the Polish workers in coal mines, shipyards, turning against the party which was supposed to be the Workers' Party and the government which was led by them. So there was General Jaruzelski, who reigned as a president for a short while, but whose successor was Lech Walesa, who had led the Solidarity movement. Now all this is also 1990s. So we look back, it is 30 years back. But then for 30 years, whether it is Poland or it is Hungary, now both these countries are important geopolitically. They have ports, they have large deposits of coal, minerals, gas, etc. And then if these resources are allowed to be exploited by these countries themselves, do not necessarily go to enrich the larger big brother next door, Russia now, they can look forward to an independence. Now, interestingly, in both cases, to take two specific cases, Poland and Hungary, both countries feel that they had fought communism, the communist domination, by calling to their aid forces of church. So the alliance between the present day orthodox, conservative parties in power in Poland and Hungary, actually the Polish spokesperson said something very clearly. He said, we fought the Red Menace with Catholic Church. And then it says we will fight the Rainbow Coalition, the Rainbow Plague, which is the LGBT, etc., again with the church. We are a Christian country. We are a conservative country. We believe in family values. So why should we accept the neoliberal values which are being imposed on us, whether it's human rights, with the LGBTQ rights by European Union? Now, interestingly, this mindset was encouraged by Trump, who also was not sympathetic to LGBTQ community, who was not very sympathetic to human rights as enunciated, especially when applied to his country. And then, of course, there were double standards. So by the time Trump was out of power and Biden is in White House, the tide has swelled. Both in Poland and in Hungary, they feel that they can now get a better deal. And the Europeans now, who were in a haste to expand membership, suddenly realize that there are countries who never shared the core values. Now, this is what is worth keeping in mind. Many countries in Europe, as we said, are again Christian countries, Roman Catholic countries, but countries like France are strictly speaking no holds barred secularism. They would not accept any religious symbolism, not even a cross, not even hijab, not even kripan, not even private education, and trying to propagate non-secular anti-human rights values at all. Now, it is not to say that France's own record is clean. France's own story of colonialism, even contemporary interventions in Sahel, in Africa, in elsewhere, in one garb or the other, even as far off as Lebanon, to protect the human rights and democracy in its erstwhile colonies, seems farcical when one revisits France's record in Tunisia and in Algeria. But this is something which people say that France has followed its own colonial past and glory at the expense of getting ill will and resentment from other countries. Now, the point is, nobody can say that a sovereign country like Poland or Hungary is not free to have its own core values. But when you join an international gathering, now this is something to do with the very funny constitutional structure and legal structure of European Union. All decisions there are taken by consensus. Even if they want to expel Poland and Hungary today, they can't do that because the impeachment process would have to be unanimous. And if two countries support each other, it's like the UN Security Council institution, Poland supports Hungary, Hungary supports Poland, and there is nothing you can do about it. What rankles the European Union is that both these countries are very willing to accept European Union's financial assistance to fight with COVID or to fight with anything else. But the problem is not only restricted to Poland and Hungary. Take some other countries. Take the recent spat between Serbia and Kosovo. Now, Serbia is a member of the European Union. Kosovo has been put on, it is on agenda, they say. It is on agenda, you are under consideration, you are on a wait list, we'll let you know what you are doing. Turkey at one stage was very keen to join, but Turkey again is on an agenda. Albania is also in an agenda. Albania, incidentally, was the only country, atheistic country after the decline of communism, also which claimed to be atheistic, with a Muslim majority population which wanted to be a member of the European Union. At one stage, they thought that the carrot of the membership of the European Union would draw all these erstwhile countries to Europe, to Western Europe. But then again, the problem is that if you take the case of Serbia and Kosovo, the people who travel from Kosovo to rest of Europe have to travel through Serbia. And the recent fight is an extremely childish fight, so to speak, that the Serbians insist that the Kosovan motor vehicles passing through their land should temporarily use Serbian number plates, and Kosovans say that if this has to be reciprocated, the Serbians should also have Kosovo number plates before they travel with one another. Now, this is complicated because this can lead to ugly situations at the border. It can revive ethnic animosities, and especially if there are certain areas where there are disputes, not only about border, but also about natural resources. The other issue is something like this, that you have the situation between Czechoslovakia and Poland, where there is a dispute between a shared coal mine along the border. Now, in European Union has imposed a fine on Poland of almost 500,000 euros a day to settle this issue. Poland refuses to do so, and the decision given in favor of the Czech Republic would not be accepted by them. Now, the interesting issue is this, that if you flout the arbitration, the verdicts of the European Court, then what remains of the European Union? And now these again, one is a member of the European Union, the other is not. So does the European Union take side of a European Union member, or does it try to tempt the non-member to follow a code of conduct which makes it believe in the core values of European Union? For how long? One doesn't know. So whether it is Turkey, whether it is Albania, whether it is a member state like Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovenia, and you have a member of NATO, which is an extremely interesting institution, Montenegro, which has asked European Union to bail it out of a $1 billion debt which it owes to China. The Chinese debt trap has also drawn the European countries into it. Now, the interesting part is this, that when they are confronted, that why do you take a loan from Chinese which you can't repay? And why do you do a deal with Chinese which you do not think is good for your economy? They come back with a reply which is almost an unanswerable repository. They say that Germany and France have done multi-billion-dollar deals with China. So when they can do these deals with China, how can they hold our doing a deal with China? And if they want us to not be under the debt trap of China, they should bail us out. So right now the problem is European Union does not want to complicate the crisis. It has promised to act behind the scene. 3 private banks, American and Europe, have tried to put together a consortium to give this $1 billion. So temporarily Montenegro can come out of that. But this, again, as we say, is an ironical situation where a member of the NATO is looking for, which is not a member of the EU, is trying EU members to bail it out of a debt trap of China. So there are these contradictions which are there, whether it is Kosovo, whether it is Serbia, whether it is Slovenia, whether it is Czech Republic, whether it is Bulgaria, whether it is Montenegro, whether it is Moldova. All these countries have a problem. Now, what is interesting in this whole situation is that not only they are a challenge to European Union or France or Germany or United States of America, it is a challenging situation but more promising than challenging for Russia and China. Now, the China is not standing to lose. China gets back this $1 billion repaid from Montenegro one way or the other. The half-built project, the delayed project is there, but nobody else is going to take it and extend it because it will only benefit China. But then the point is that the Europeans are so dependent on Russian energy resources, whether it's Nord 2, Nord 3, neither France nor Germany can follow blindly the economic sanctions which Americans might impose against the Russians. So they make a deal. Now again, this leaves us with very interesting small countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, right next to Russia. But they have shown some courage. They have opened their borders to refugees who seek shelter from Belarus, where they are prosecuted. But whether the Belarus rebels take shelter in Lithuania, Estonia, or go to Ukraine, they have been hunted and killed there. So there is this spillover of violence which the Russians don't seem to worry very much about and impinge on the borders and kill extraterritorially through secret service agents, through covert operations, which is going to create a situation badly. Then there is an issue of cyber terrorism. So again, the Europeans say, the Estonians, Latvians, etc. have criticized the Russians of cyber terrorism, Chinese of cyber terrorism. But again, here again we see there are double standards. When it comes to technology companies like Huawei, the Germans, the French are as dependent on this technology as the smaller countries in Eastern Europe are. So the smaller countries again have one more problem because of poverty, because their population was either gypsies or Romans, and because they themselves have been not very good to their sub-ethnic minorities, etc. Because ever since the breakup of Yugoslavia, the geographical borders have not been very well defined. The genocidal violence which was unleashed in Serbia was again Bosnia-Herzegovina, memories are still tight. The war crimes charges, human rights violation charges, which were put against the leaders in these countries. Before they wanted to join the European Union, they were supposed to surrender the war criminals to the International Court of Criminal Court and Tribunals. All these issues have gone into the back burner for the past 4 or 5 years. But now they are coming to haunt again. Because even we talked of the number plate dispute between Serbia and Kosovo. This was a deal brokered 3-4 years back by European Unions. So why can't a deal brokered be maintained? It was like the Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict. But the point is that when elephants fight, the grass gets crushed, they say. So when there is a big power rivalry between Russia and European Union as a composite aspiring great actor, big player in international affairs, or the two majors, France and Germany, they have to very delicately maintain their relationship, bilateral, multilateral, and with these smaller countries. So these smaller countries sometimes realize very well that they cannot either accept totally the core values, which have never been their core values. One could even argue the core values which France and Germany talk about have not actually been the core values of even the Western Europe, because if you see the explosion of neo-Nazi violence, Islamophobic violence, even Islamic terrorist violence in France, in Germany, in Norway, in Sweden, you have to think in terms of that there are double standards about these things. So we have to worry about this because Europe has a clear-cut divide between Western Europe and Eastern and Central Europe. There is a similar divide between Eastern and Central Europe, maybe not as deep, between them and the Russians. There also are rivalries within, and the Russians try to play one against the other. They try at times to side with one country in Eastern Europe, then other country. Putin, of course, gives blind support to Belarusian president, and of course, he doesn't yield any ground in either Ukraine or in Georgia or in Caucasus or in Armenia. So he has a very uneasy relationship with Turkey at the moment, but so many big powers in so many theaters working that Eastern Europe again will tend to get neglected, and we will not know what kind of a relationship we should have with them. We shall discuss this, how India should cope with this a little later. as long as East European countries, the majority of them, were parts of the Soviet Empire, were treated as their satellites, and India had a special relationship in the second half of the 20th century with first Soviet Union, then Russia. It had an easy relationship with the East European countries. We had an equally good relationship with West Germany and East Germany. We were close to Poland, we were close to Hungary. Indian students went there, experts went there, doctors, engineers came from that place, poets and scholars were exchanged, cultural centers operated. We had a good relationship with Czechoslovakia. We probably were less well represented in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, but these countries were very proud of their Indo-Aryan heritage, linguistic heritage, affinities with India. So people had a very easy, friendly relationship with them. We had interesting relationship with Romania. And again, India had a mindset, even in post-colonial independent India, that Europe was preferable to the dark continent of Africa, which is something which we must regret now, which we must make amends for, because we thought that these were comfortable postings for diplomats. They were nice places to visit for our politicians, high-level visits. They were nice capitals where you could talk in terms of Bohemian crystal, you could talk in terms of music, you can talk in terms of artistic heritage, and you could treat Europe, Eastern Europe, as more or less extension of Western Europe. They were not English speaking, but nor were France and Germany. So the Indians were more comfortable, partly courtesy Soviet Union and Russia, which provided access to them. The same thing can be said to a certain extent about Central Asian republics. India did not have an independent relationship with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, etc., as long as they were part of the Russian Federation. They still are part of the Commonwealth of States, but ever since the decline of Soviet Union, breakdown of the Soviet Empire, its might, Indian relationship with these countries has also been affected. They have been especially affected because if the countries rebelled against the communist domination, talk in terms of their Christian identity, Roman Catholic identity, their resistance to human rights and rule of law as imposed on them by hypocritical Western world, I think the problems are there because Indians are more comfortable trying to align on the side of West Europeans in the United States of America in terms of human rights, in terms of environment, in terms of secularism, till very, very recently. Now, right now, also the relationship gets a little complicated. If India puts equal emphasis on its national identity, which is religico-cultural, Hindu, Buddhist, plus harking back to its own past, then it is difficult to imagine how it has an easy relationship with a country which identifies itself primarily as a Roman Catholic Christian country and proudly proclaiming it to be so, and saying that we are a Christian country, we are a white country, we are a country which have our own national past. So this conflict of chauvinism and xenophobia is not very conducive to have an easy relationship there. Also, the economic plight of the East European countries is such that there was a time when Czechs were the world leaders in optics, they were world leaders in small arms, they were world leaders even now some claim in automobiles. But then the point is that they are not big players and India has other options. So India cannot afford to just turn a blind eye towards Eastern and Central Europe, but it would need a policy of farsightedness, of calibration, not alienating either major power, major magnet, and then try to, most important of all, India should have something to offer to these countries. So when East European countries were being criticized for taking Chinese vaccines, they said nobody else was giving us these vaccines. The Russians were giving us the vaccines, the Chinese were giving us the vaccines. As long as India is not in a position of economic strength, I think there is only limited possibility of India playing a decisive role in this theatre. But it would be to our disadvantage if we did not look at this area with greater interest. That's all we have for you this week. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much.